But I do want to ask about marketing and how much should an author be expected to contribute to their marketing, and what are the best ways for them to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say as an author, if your title is the lead title for that season, for that publisher, they're going to do a lot more marketing than if you're anywhere on the mid list. But most books are, on that mid list, and publishers thus don't do as much there. Usually they'll do kind of the bare minimum, where it'll be sending out your books to, trade reviews like Kirkus and School Library Journal and all those, maybe sending it out to some bloggers, sending out some ARCs, things like that. But not a whole lot more than that. I find that a lot of times as an author, especially if you're a debut author and you're trying to break out and find a following and, get some decent sales, you have to be prepared to do a fair amount of marketing yourself. I wish there was a little bit more balance there, but unfortunately that's kind of the nature of publishing these days, where a lot of it is put on the author. And that could be things like, building up your social media following, doing book giveaways, doing blog tours, doing school visits, doing a signing in your local town at your local indie bookstore, what have you. Like all those little things help, I think, to some extent. Being present so new readers can find you, whether it's with an author website or, like I said, social media. And you don't have to go crazy. Like you'll see a lot of articles online about, how much should you do and should you be spending like half your advance on your marketing? Probably not. There's a lot of things you can do without spending a lot of money, and, get new readers. So, and it's also doing what you're comfortable with too. Like, some authors are more comfortable with, doing school visits and things like that than others. So it's finding what's right for you too. And also one of the first things I do, when I sell a book is like, hey, closer to pub, like, can we get a call with someone in marketing that's working on the book and see what they're doing, get a marketing plan, and then when it's closer to pub, running through those ideas, what ideas the author might have, and how we can work together as a team and get the most exposure, for the book and get it out to as many readers as possible.
Obviously, one of the most important things you can do is appear on the Middle Grade Ninja podcast. So head to middlegradeninja.com, email me. I love guests that I don't have to look for. If you find me, that's so much easier for me. And thus far, I'm not charging. Who knows? Maybe one day. Probably I won't, but it's a nice dream.
I remember I found you back in 2013 as a new agent.
Yeah, I wasn't charging then, hasn't changed since, so I don't think it's ever going to happen. Must be something more to this than money.
The joy of helping others.
So if book does so-so, doesn't do absolutely terrible, earns back the advance, but it doesn't set the world on fire, when you go to pitch the next book, how much can you cite the author's previous marketing efforts as a selling point?
That honestly doesn't usually come in until a publisher is interested in taking it to acquisitions, where they're bringing in sales and marketing, who's going to want to know those things. So, yeah, sometimes I've had publishers be like, okay, well, what's their social media following? Are they going to do something to increase that? What kinds of things did they do for their last book? So that is important to some publishers. Some publishers want more details on that than others. Definitely earning out is a great start. But publishers, I think most publishers, especially if you're going from one to the other, because obviously if you're selling a book to the original publisher, they're going to know all those things. But if you're, selling something to a new house, unless your sales, like you sold like 5 copies, usually they're willing to, work with you if they're passionate about the book. So I would say just because the first book maybe didn't do as well as they'd hoped, that doesn't mean that you can never sell another book again. Definitely not.
Gotcha.
But sometimes a book might not sell well. Sorry, a book might not sell well, but you'll get really good reviews, or you'll, get some kind of awards buzz, even if the book doesn't win an award. So things like that are important as well, and they mean something to publishers.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. If a book does absolutely dismal, everyone hates it in the reviews, and it doesn't sell, is it pen name a clock, or is there a strategy to come back from that?
I mean, really, a lot of times the next project just speaks for itself, though, because before the editor is asking for all that info on what the sales actually were and reviews and things like that, they're reading that next book, and if they love it enough and they're willing to, put their team behind it, then, you can still have a super successful next book, even if the first book didn't do so well. Most authors, don't have this huge breakout success to start with, that they're, slowly building, from book to book. And sometimes there's big changes too, like your first book, maybe 5 people read it, but then your next book becomes a New York Times bestseller. So you never really know.